As dusk settled on Saturday evening, DEA agent Agent Costa squinted through his binoculars at the dilapidated house. The armed assassins patrolling the old rundown shack just south of the border wouldn't hesitate to fire if his foot so much as bristled against the brush in which he was hiding. Just 75 feet from the old shack, he had crawled from a quarter of a mile away to get a glimpse of what was going on inside. And now, on this warm night, his legs trembled a little because he knew tonight was the night he was going to make his move. He knew their schedule by now, and right on schedule, the two Ford pickup trucks with cartel members brandishing AR-15s were gunning their engines and spewing up clouds of dust. If Agent Costa was right, the drug shipment had been unloaded, and a team inside was moving it through a custom-built underground railroad system north of the border to San Ignacio. But to be sure, he would need to see inside. Within a few minutes, calm drenched the night, and Costa summoned the courage to inch forward on his knees. Even now, after weeks of surveillance, he couldn't be sure what security measures were in place that could spot him crawling on the dirt, on his filthy jeans to his target. Like a wildcat on a hunt, he would stop, then move a few meters, and then stop, and listen, and wait. Before long, he was right outside. Nobody on the inside would be expecting another drop tonight, if the pattern of the last few weeks held. Just opening the door risked death. But he had to confirm this was the drop point where an estimate 120 million in fentanyl had been smuggled over the past 6 months. Gently, he pulled the door open until it was sufficiently ajar that he could squeeze his body in. He breathed a sigh of relief when it didn't creak. The wood floor and worn-down building was empty but for a trap door on the northwest side of the structure. Another perilous moment lay ahead, but again he knew he needed to lift up the hatch. If a railroad was beneath it, he would have confirmation that this was the smuggling route he had been searching for over the past year. On his hands and knees, he crawled over to limit the floorboards echoing with each footstep. As he lifted the trap door, a dim light shone on a railroad. He had hit the jackpot. Now the real danger began. It was one thing to find the route, but it was another to take down heavily armed cartel members from one of the biggest drug organizations in Mexico. He sidled back out of the old shack and back to the safety of the bush, waited another hour in silence, and then slipped into the night over the rolling hills to his Toyota Corolla stashed off the main road. As he drove back to base, he was already hatching his plan for the takedown. 48 hours later, after the sun had set, the Ford pickups were back, but so too were a dozen DEA agents armed to the teeth. On Costa's order, they were going to swoop in as part of a surprise attack. The cartel gunmen were inside. The drop-off was clearly being made inside. And outside, the tension in the group could be cut with a knife. They waited and waited, and then the order came. 3, 2, 1. 3 agents trotted up to the door. If Costa was right, they should be able to break the door down and make easy arrests. 20 feet from the door, 18, 16. And then, unexpectedly, like a bolt, one of the cartel members came out, clearly planning to just have a smoke in the cooling night air. But as soon as he stepped out, he was frozen momentarily with shock as the DEA was running towards him, set to swarm the wooden shack. Quickly, he raced inside and then fired shots. Now it was on. Time to close the net. Following the Alpha team came the Bravo and Delta teams from each side, shots blazing through the night air like missiles. The cartel members were trapped, but they kept shooting. And then, all of a sudden, silence. Were they all dead? Costa ordered a ceasefire and then another few shots to be fired to see if there would be a response, but no return fire came, just deadening silence. Costa knew the only way to be sure everyone was dead inside was to approach and open the door. A near-suicide mission if ever there was one. He led by example, carefully approached the shack and, with his team flanking him, gently pulled the door ajar. But what he saw inside sent a shiver down his spine. Expecting to see a floor drenched in blood and bodies, Costa instead saw an empty barn and instantly went on high alert. Having surrounded the building earlier, this could only mean one thing. The cartel had escaped down the hatch, and he would have to follow them into the darkness of the tunnels. He approached the hatch and pulled it up. No pistol was pointing at him. No shots fired. He had to lower himself in. And as he did, he waited and listened in the dark. No footsteps, no sounds, just darkness and silence. His team followed. With torches illuminating the tunnel, they trotted from one side of the US-Mexico border to the other, expecting an ambush to be fired upon, or some bomb to detonate on them. Yet nothing. And then finally, drenched in sweat, They were on the other side. Now a new horror confronted them, climbing up the ladder to open a new hatch at an unknown building north of the border. The odds were high the cartel was waiting for them and would open fire immediately and murder the first man to breach the hatch. Screw it, Costa thought, and he went up, leading by example. As he braced himself, he pushed open the trap door and was enveloped by darkness. Nothing but the sound of crickets surrounded him. Quickly he conducted surveillance to see if anybody lurked in the shadows. But the surroundings were empty. No tire marks outside either to suggest an escape. Where had they gone? Agent Costa and his team decided to make the walk back through the tunnel to Mexico. Somehow, they cartel gunmen and anyone else inside had vanished. As they marched back and the adrenaline rushes had subsided, they pondered where they could have gone. What did they miss? Like a wolf pack where the alpha male marches at the back of the group, Costa pulled up the rear. And it was a fateful decision. Within striking distance of returning to the shack, about a quarter of a mile away, with his team up ahead, he heard a faint rustle from behind him. It couldn't be a DEA agent. They were in front of him. It could only mean one thing. The cartel had built an escape room into the tunnel, and a group of cartel members were hiding in wait, inside, until danger had passed. Costa couldn't risk shouting up to his team to let them know. Besides, their footsteps fading into the distance would lead the cartel to assume the danger had passed. Costa got on his hands and knees and crawled back into the bowels of the tunnel, inching carefully in the hopes of hearing another faint sound that would alert him to their location. And then, a slight noise, ever so faint. He knew exactly where they were, could see the camouflaged outline of a wooden door that was covered in dirt to hide its location. He raised his AR-15 semi-automatic carbine and pulled the trigger. A rainstorm of fire returned in his direction, but on the ground already they whizzed over his head. He couldn't see them, and they couldn't see him through the flimsy wooden door, but they were surely in a tiny, enclosed space and were standing. That is until the door burst open, and suddenly he was facing down single-handedly the only two surviving cartel members. He took one out with precision accuracy, but the other fired at him at the exact same time. His left shoulder was blown back, and as his body fell, he got off a final shot, more in desperation than anything. As a cloud of smoke from the gunfire settled and Costa fell on his back in agony, the last thing he heard was his agents racing towards him, shouting. But he had done enough. While he didn't know it at the time, blood was gushing from his body. His last shot had taken out the final gunman. Later, as he woke up in the hospital, he would hear from his team about the $19 million worth of fentanyl that was being transported that night alone. This would turn out to be one of the major pipelines for drug trafficking between Mexico and the US, and Costa had both located it and single-handedly taken out a whole drug cartel faction. He was awarded the highest honor bestowed on a DEA agent, the Administrator's Award of Honor. Today, former Agent Costa lives with his family in an undisclosed location. His colleagues continue to lead similar missions to thwart the drug flow. So that'll do it for today's story, but if you haven't already, tell us what you would have done if you were in Agent Costa's shoes. Would you have gone back alone into the tunnel to take on the cartel by yourself? And if you haven't already, don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe for more riveting crime and mystery stories.